Before we begin this emotional story, if this is your first time watching the channel, please make sure to like this video, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Now, let's begin. The Hale Mansion stood on the quiet edge of New York, surrounded by tall trees and cold air that seemed to hold its breath. Inside that house lived Edward Hale, a man whose name once appeared in every business magazine, known for his luxury, power, and success. But none of that mattered anymore. His wife was gone, and the only thing that kept him breathing was his little daughter, Leela, a fragile girl the world believed was born blind. Leela's mother had died in a car crash just a week after she came into the world. Since then, the mansion had become a shadow of what it once was. The halls were spotless but empty, the chandeliers bright but joyless. Edward spent his days in silence, reading to Leela, feeding her, watching her tiny hands reach for toys she could not see. Every day he prayed she would smile, but she never did. Her pale blue eyes only stared into nothingness. To him, her silence was a punishment he deserved. For years, doctors came and went, each one confirming the same thing: Leela was completely blind. Edward accepted it, or at least tried to. He bought her the best equipment, filled her room with sounds and textures, anything to help her feel less lost. But no matter how much he tried, she stayed trapped in her own quiet world. Then, one winter morning, a new maid arrived at the mansion. Her name was Clara Brooks, a young woman with tired eyes and a voice soft as morning light. She had come looking for work after losing something no mother should ever lose, her newborn daughter. When Edward opened the door, he didn't see her sadness, but her calmness. She didn't flinch at the silence that scared others away. And for the first time in a long while, Edward felt something shift in the air, something almost like hope. That was the morning everything began to change. The mansion felt heavier in winter, like the walls carried memories too painful to forget. Edward spent most of his mornings in the study, staring out the tall glass windows that overlooked the frozen garden. He barely spoke unless necessary. The staff moved quietly through the halls, careful not to make a sound that might disturb Leela. Clara Brooks, the new maid, had only been there for 2 days, yet she already sensed the sorrow in the air. Every step she took echoed softly, like the house was listening. She wasn't used to such silence. It reminded her too much of the weeks after losing her own baby. That loss had left her hollow, but she took the job to escape the loneliness of her small apartment in the city. One afternoon, while dusting the living room, Clara saw her for the first time. Leela Hale, the billionaire's daughter. The little girl sat by a tall window, her small fingers tracing the edge of her stuffed rabbit. Her pale blue eyes stared into nothing, her face calm but distant, like she was floating between worlds. Clara froze. There was something heartbreakingly beautiful about her stillness. She didn't speak to her, not yet. She just continued her work quietly, glancing at Leela from time to time. The girl barely moved. But when Clara dropped her feathered duster by mistake, she noticed something strange. Leela's head tilted, just slightly, in the direction of the sound. It was so small a gesture that most would have missed it, but Clara saw it. Her chest tightened. She told herself it meant nothing. Maybe it was just instinct, maybe coincidence. But that small moment stayed with her for the rest of the day. That night, As Clara lay awake in her small room, she couldn't stop seeing that image in her mind. The blind girl turning her head toward sound. It was the first spark of something she didn't yet understand. A spark that would soon uncover truths no one in that house was ready to face. The next few days at the Hale mansion passed slowly, filled with silence and routine. Edward remained distant, always locked away in his study or sitting near Leela, reading stories she never reacted to. He wanted to believe his presence brought her comfort, but every night when he kissed her forehead, her blank eyes only reminded him of everything he had lost. Clara moved quietly through her tasks, cleaning, folding, and preparing meals, but her eyes were always drawn to Leela. The little girl fascinated her. There was something about her stillness that didn't feel empty. It felt watchful. Clara often caught herself pausing mid-task just to observe how Leela's fingers moved along her toy, how her breathing changed when someone entered the room. One evening, as the sun began to fade, Clara was dusting a bookshelf near Leela's window. The light fell soft across the child's face, painting her in gold. That's when Clara heard something faint, a small hum, almost like a whisper. She turned, unsure if she imagined it, but it was real. The sound came from Leela. The girl was humming. It wasn't a tune Clara recognized, just a soft string of notes, broken and quiet, but it was the first sound she had ever made. Her heart tightened. She didn't move or speak, afraid that any sound might break the moment. She simply listened. The tune was strange and low, like a secret song only Leela knew. Then, just as it began, the humming stopped. Her lips stilled, and her head turned slightly toward the window again. Clara felt tears fill her eyes. She didn't know if it meant progress, memory, or something else entirely. But for the first time, she felt like the little girl inside that mansion wasn't as lost as everyone believed. Something inside her was trying to reach out, and Clara was the first to hear it.
That night, Clara whispered to herself before falling asleep, "You're not as blind as they think, are you?" The morning air in the Hale mansion was cold and still. Clara moved quietly from room to room, her footsteps soft against the marble floors. She had been there for almost 2 weeks now, long enough to understand that this house had two kinds of silence, the heavy kind that came from grief and the careful kind that came from secrets. That day, while dusting the shelves in Leela's room, Clara noticed something unusual. The little girl was sitting on the rug with her stuffed rabbit, whispering again. Her voice was barely audible, like she was speaking to the toy. Clara froze, her heart pounding. She didn't want to interrupt, so she stood quietly by the dresser, pretending to arrange books. Then she saw it, the faintest movement of Leela's eyes. They weren't blank or lifeless, as everyone said. They shifted slightly, following the direction of Clara's movement. It was small, almost invisible, but Clara's breath caught in her chest. She slowly took a few steps sideways. Leela's eyes twitched again, following the motion. Clara's hand trembled. Could she really be seeing this? She needed to be sure. Carefully, she pulled out her phone, pretending to check the time. The screen's light flickered as she moved it across the room. For a brief second, the glow passed over Leela's face, and her eyelids fluttered. It wasn't strong, but it was there. A reflex, a reaction, something. Clara turned the phone off quickly, her heart racing. She didn't want to scare the child or make a mistake. She sat down quietly and watched as Leela went back to whispering softly to her toy, completely unaware of what had just happened. Clara couldn't believe it. Everyone said Leela was blind. Every doctor, every report, every test, all of it said the same thing. But what she saw didn't lie. Leela could sense light. Maybe not fully see, but something inside those eyes was still alive. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling, whispering to herself, "If she can see, then someone has been lying." The next morning, Clara awoke early, her heart still heavy from what she had witnessed. The mansion felt different now, like every corner was watching her, waiting to see what she would do next. She tried to stay calm as she went about her chores, but the image of Leela's flickering eyes wouldn't leave her mind. At breakfast, Mr. Edward Hale sat alone at the table, staring at his untouched coffee. His face looked tired, his eyes red from another sleepless night. Clara greeted him softly, but he barely nodded. He looked like a man haunted by memories he refused to let go of. She wondered if he even noticed how much his daughter longed for attention, or if he was too buried in his grief to care. Later that afternoon, Clara found Leela sitting by the window, facing the sunlight. The little girl's hands rested on her lap, but there was a faint smile on her lips, almost as if she could feel the warmth through more than just her skin. Clara quietly approached, her voice gentle. Lila tilted her head toward her voice and nodded. "It feels like Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Clara froze. That one word, Mommy, hit her like a wave. There was a deep ache behind it, the kind that only a child who has lost everything could understand. Clara knelt beside her and held her hand gently. The girl's skin was cold, fragile. As they sat together, Clara saw it again. The way Lila's eyes blinked when the sun shifted through the window blinds, how her pupils reacted faintly to the light. Her chest tightened. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. Someone had hidden the truth about this little girl. And the more Clara thought about it, the clearer it became. Maybe the person keeping the secret wasn't Lila at all. Maybe it was Edward. That night, Clara stood outside Lila's room, listening to the soft humming coming from inside. It was a lullaby, one she had never heard before. But as she leaned closer, she realized something terrifying. Lila wasn't humming alone. There was another, deeper voice, faint, distant, and full of sorrow, singing with her from somewhere inside the dark room. Clara froze by the doorway, her breath caught in her throat. The sound coming from Lila's room wasn't her imagination. There was clearly another voice, low, mournful, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. It wrapped around the child's soft humming, blending into a melody that felt too human to belong to anyone alive, yet too ghostly to belong to anyone alive. Her trembling hand reached for the doorknob. Slowly, she pushed it open, and the creak made her heart jump. The room was dim, lit only by the faint nightlight beside Lila's bed. The little girl sat cross-legged, her stuffed rabbit in her lap, still singing that haunting tune. Her eyes darted around the room. No one else was there. The curtains swayed gently, but the windows were shut. The deeper voice faded, almost like it realized it had been caught. Lila stopped humming, her head turning slightly toward Clara. "You shouldn't come in when the lights are low," she said quietly. Clara swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "Why not, sweetheart?" "Because he doesn't like it when people listen," she whispered. Clara's skin prickled. She wanted to ask who he was, but something inside her told her to wait. Instead, she knelt beside the bed and tucked Leela's blanket gently around her.
The girl smiled faintly and closed her eyes, her breathing slow and peaceful. When Clara left the room, she leaned against the hallway wall, her chest rising and falling fast. Her mind raced with questions. Who was the voice? What was happening in that mansion? Later that night, she went to the living room and found an old photograph sitting on the piano. It showed Edward, a woman, and a young baby. The woman had the same smile as Leela, warm, fragile, full of light. Clara turned the photo over and saw a date written behind it. It was the same year Leela was born, and the same year Edward's wife had died. She whispered to herself, her voice breaking, "What really happened in this house?" And from somewhere deep in the mansion, faint but real, the lullaby started again. The next morning, Clara couldn't shake the eerie song from her head. It followed her through the mansion, whispering at the edges of her thoughts like a memory she didn't own. Every time she looked at Leela, she wondered if the child knew who the voice belonged to, or if she was somehow calling it. After breakfast, Edward left for the city, saying he had meetings. His words were cold, mechanical. Clara noticed how he avoided looking at Leela before he left. The child sat quietly at the table, tracing circles on her plate, her face unreadable. When the door closed behind him, the silence grew heavy again. Clara decided to finish her cleaning early. She dusted, polished, and folded, anything to keep her mind busy. But while wiping the upstairs hallway, she noticed a door she hadn't seen before. It was at the far end, tucked behind a tall antique cabinet. It looked old, its paint cracked, and its handle rusted. What caught her attention most was the small padlock on it. A locked room in a mansion like this wasn't unusual, but something about this one felt wrong. She crouched down and touched the handle. It was cold, too cold, as if untouched for years. She could faintly hear something, maybe a whisper, or the wind passing through the walls. Clara's voice suddenly came from behind her. "You shouldn't touch that door, Miss Clara." Clara turned sharply. The little girl stood at the end of the hallway, holding her stuffed rabbit. Her tone was calm but distant, like she wasn't entirely there. "Why not, sweetheart?" Clara asked softly. "Because that's where Mommy sleeps," Leela said, her voice trembling. Clara's chest tightened. She looked from the locked door to the little girl's pale face. The hallway suddenly felt colder, the light dimmer. Clara forced a smile and took Leela's hand gently. "Come on, dear, let's go downstairs." As they walked away, Clara couldn't resist glancing back. For just a second, she thought she saw movement, a shadow behind the crack of that locked door, shifting slowly as if something inside had heard them. That night, when she tried to sleep, Clara dreamed of that door, and in the dream, it wasn't locked anymore. Clara woke up sweating. The dream about the locked door felt too real. The creak of the hinges, the smell of dust and perfume, the faint voice whispering her name. She sat up and pressed her palms to her face, trying to shake it off, but her heartbeat refused to calm down. Something was wrong in that mansion, and she could feel it creeping closer every day. Downstairs, she found Lila sitting on the floor near the piano again. The same photograph from before was in her hands, the one of Edward, his late wife, and baby Lila. The girl was tracing her mother's face with a gentle touch. Clara knelt beside her.
"That's your mommy, right?" she asked softly. Lila nodded. "Daddy says she's sleeping upstairs," she said, her tone almost innocent. "But I still hear her sometimes when it rains." Clara's heart sank. She tried to smile, brushing a strand of hair from Lila's forehead. "That's a beautiful memory to keep, sweetheart." When Clara reached for the photograph to put it back, her hand froze. The picture wasn't the same. The baby's eyes, they were open now, wide, alive, staring directly at her. She blinked hard, rubbed her eyes, and looked again, but this time the eyes were closed, just like before. Her breath caught. Maybe she was tired. Maybe her mind was playing tricks. But something deep inside told her she wasn't imagining it. She put the photograph down and stood up slowly. That afternoon, while Edward was in his study, Clara decided to ask him about the locked room. "Sir," she began nervously, "I was cleaning upstairs and noticed a door that's—" He cut her off sharply. "Don't go near that room, Clara, ever." His voice was low but fierce, his eyes filled with something between anger and fear. She nodded quickly, murmuring an apology. But the look in his eyes stayed with her long after he walked away. It wasn't just grief she saw in him, it was guilt. Later that night, thunder rolled through the sky, rain lashed against the windows, and somewhere upstairs, through the storm, Clara heard it again, the sound of a woman singing softly, coming from behind that locked door. The storm raged through the night, shaking the old mansion with wind and thunder. Clara couldn't sleep. The melody from behind the locked door kept slipping into her thoughts, soft but haunting, as if someone wanted to be heard. Around midnight, she got out of bed and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. The hallway lights flickered, and the air felt colder than usual. She walked slowly toward the stairs, but something caught her attention. The large mirror by the hallway corner, one she had cleaned a dozen times, looked different. The reflection wasn't showing the hallway as it was. Instead, it showed the same hallway, but darker, older, as if it belonged to another time. Clara took a cautious step closer. Her reflection moved, but behind her reflection, there was someone else, a woman standing in the shadows, her pale dress torn, her long dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders. The woman's face was blurred at first, but when the lightning flashed outside, Clara saw her clearly. It was the same woman from the photograph. Clara stumbled backward, nearly falling. The reflection stayed still, the woman's eyes locked on hers, full of sorrow and warning. The mirror fogged slightly, and words began to appear as if written by invisible hands. "She can see." Clara's heart pounded. She blinked, and the writing vanished. The reflection returned to normal, just her and the hallway again. But she couldn't move. Her legs felt frozen, her chest heavy. Then she heard a faint giggle, Lila's voice, coming from behind her. "Miss Clara," Lila said softly, standing barefoot by the door. "Mommy says you shouldn't look when she's trying to talk." Clara turned slowly, her lips trembling. "Sweetheart, when did you—" Lila tilted her head. "Mommy's awake tonight," she whispered, then smiled faintly. "She wants you to help her open the door." The thunder crashed again, louder this time, shaking the glass windows. Clara's blood ran cold as she glanced back at the mirror and saw the reflection of the locked door behind her, wide open.
Clara spun around instantly,
Her breath caught in her throat, but when she looked down the hall, the locked door was still shut, the same rusted padlock hanging cold and still. Her hands trembled. She looked back at the mirror, but it only showed her own terrified reflection now. No door, no woman, no ghostly message, just silence. She turned to Lila, who was still standing barefoot, her little stuffed rabbit pressed against her chest. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't be out of bed," Clara whispered. Lila just stared ahead, her pale blue eyes wide, unfocused, but full of strange awareness. "Mommy said it's time," she murmured softly. "Time to tell the truth." Clara knelt down, trying to keep her voice calm. "What truth, dear?" Lila tilted her head. The light flickered. Then she said quietly, "Daddy made Mommy sleep. He said she was too loud." Clara froze. Her heart started pounding so hard she thought it might stop. She looked down the hall again at that locked door, her hands shaking. Could it be true? Could Edward have done something to his wife? When morning came, Edward seemed different. He was pale, distant, his hands shaking slightly as he read the newspaper. Clara couldn't look at him without remembering Lila's words. She wanted to ask, to confront him, but fear held her back. Later that day, while Edward was on a call in his office, Clara heard a faint click from upstairs. It was coming from the locked door. She ran up the stairs, her heart racing. The padlock, the one that had always been there, was now hanging open. She reached for it, her fingers trembling. Slowly, she pushed the door. It creaked, opening halfway before getting stuck. The smell hit her first, old perfume mixed with something rotten, something that made her stomach twist. Inside, the room was covered in dust and cobwebs. A vanity sat against the wall, a cracked mirror above it. On the floor lay a woman's nightgown, faded but still scented faintly with lavender. On the bed was a small, untouched music box, the same melody Clara had heard in her dreams, and beside it a photograph of Edward and his wife torn in half. Just then, the floor creaked behind her. Clara turned slowly, but no one was there. Only the faint whisper of a woman's voice drifting through the air. "You shouldn't have opened it." Clara's heart thudded as the voice faded into silence. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with memories and grief that had never been laid to rest. Her trembling hand reached for the small music box on the bed. It was coated in dust, the silver edges tarnished with time. Carefully, she opened it. The familiar melody began to play, the same one she'd heard echoing through the mansion night after night. The sound was soft but chilling, like the heartbeat of the house itself. As it played, Clara noticed something else, tiny scratches inside the lid. She wiped away the dust and realized they were words, etched in shaky handwriting. "He lied. She can see." Her hands went cold. The same message she saw in the mirror, the same phrase that had haunted her dreams. She whispered to herself, "Who wrote this?" But the room stayed silent. Then, something moved in the corner. A faint shimmer, almost like smoke, gathered near the cracked mirror. Slowly, it took shape. The outline of a woman, her hair loose, her eyes filled with pain. The spirit didn't look angry. She looked heartbroken. Clara's voice trembled. Are you her?" The ghost nodded faintly, her lips barely moving. "He took her sight to hide the truth."
Clara stepped back, her breath shaking. Hide what? Before the spirit could answer, footsteps echoed down the hallway, heavy, fast, determined. Edward! His voice thundered through the air. Clara, what are you doing in there? She panicked and closed the music box. The spirit vanished instantly, as if swallowed by the sound of the slam. Edward appeared in the doorway, his eyes blazing with fury. I told you never to open this room for a reason. If you value your job, you'll forget whatever you saw. He slammed the door shut and locked it again, breathing heavily. But as Clara was led away, she noticed his hands shaking and his eyes glistening with tears. That night, the melody from the music box played again. Only this time, it wasn't coming from behind the locked door. It was coming from Leela's room. Clara rushed down the dark hallway, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The haunting melody floated from Leela's room, soft but clear, the same tune that had played from the music box hours earlier. She pushed the door open slowly, and her breath caught in her chest.
Lila was sitting up in bed, humming the melody perfectly, her little hands turning the same silver music box on her lap. But that wasn't what terrified Clara. It was Lila's eyes. They were open, wide, alive, focused straight on her. Clara froze. Lila, you can see me? For a long moment, Lila said nothing. Then her lips trembled, and tears filled her eyes. I wasn't supposed to tell, she whispered. Daddy said if I told anyone, Mommy would go away forever. Clara's knees weakened, and she sank down beside the bed. Sweetheart, you can trust me. I won't let anyone hurt you. Lila's small hands clutched the music box tightly. Mommy didn't want to sleep, she said softly. She wanted to take me away. Daddy got angry, and then she stopped singing. Her voice cracked, a tiny sob escaping. I saw it happen, Miss Clara. I saw everything. Clara's heart shattered. She pulled the girl into her arms, her own tears falling freely. The pieces of truth were coming together now. Edward's wife hadn't died peacefully. She had been silenced. And Edward, desperate to hide the truth, made everyone believe Lila was blind, so no one would know the child had witnessed it. A loud crash came from downstairs, snapping Clara out of her thoughts. Heavy footsteps followed, fast and furious. Edward's voice roared from below. Where is she? Lila flinched in Clara's arms. He knows, Miss Clara. He knows I told you. The lights flickered again. The temperature dropped suddenly, their breath visible in the cold air. Then from behind them, the mirror on the wall cracked, and through the crack came that same ghostly whisper, Don't be afraid. I'm here now. Clara turned slowly. The faint image of Lila's mother stood behind them, glowing softly through the shadows. Clara froze, staring at the faint figure that shimmered in the cracked mirror. The woman's presence filled the room with both peace and sorrow. She looked so much like Lila, the same soft curls, the same gentle eyes, but her expression carried something deeper, something broken. Lila clung to Clara's arm, whispering, That's Mommy! Her small voice trembled with both fear and longing. The ghostly figure turned her gaze toward them. Her lips moved, but the words came out like the wind, soft, aching, impossible to ignore. He's coming. You must protect her. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echoed closer. Edward's voice thundered through the hallway. Clara, step away from my daughter! Clara turned just as he appeared at the doorway, his face pale, his eyes wild. He looked like a man torn between guilt and madness. The music box in Lila's hand played by itself now, the melody growing louder, sharper, almost like a warning. Edward, Clara said firmly,
standing in front of Lila. "You saw everything, didn't you? That night when your wife—" "Enough!" he shouted, his voice breaking. "You don't know what you're saying. She was going to leave with my daughter. She was going to destroy everything." Lila cried out, "You hurt her!" Edward's whole body went still, his eyes filled with tears, his lips trembling as if he couldn't breathe. Behind him, the air grew colder. The mirror's light brightened, and the ghostly woman stepped out of the reflection. Her presence silenced everything. Edward's anger collapsed into shock as he saw her, his wife, standing before him. She didn't speak, she only looked at him, her eyes full of heartbreak. Then she lifted her hand and gently touched Lila's cheek. Lila's eyes widened. "Mommy!" For the first time in years, the girl's vision was clear. Tears fell from her eyes as her mother's ghost smiled faintly and whispered, "Now you can truly see, my love." A flash of white light filled the room, and when it faded, the mirror shattered completely. Edward fell to his knees trembling as Clara held Lila tightly. The house was silent again, but nothing would ever be the same. When the light faded, the silence that followed was heavy and endless. Edward knelt on the cold floor, staring blankly at the shattered pieces of the mirror. His wife's ghost was gone, but her presence lingered, a quiet, powerful energy that made the air hum. Clara held Lila close, her heart racing, tears still fresh on her cheeks. "Edward," she said softly, her voice shaking, "it's over. You don't have to hide anymore. She wanted you to protect your daughter, not bury her in lies." Edward's lips trembled. "I didn't mean for any of this. I just wanted her safe. I thought if no one knew she could see, they'd stop asking questions. I thought I could erase that night." Lila stepped forward, her little hands trembling. "You lied to me, Daddy. You said Mommy was asleep."
Her father broke then, truly broke. He reached for her, his tears spilling fast, his voice raw. "I was wrong, Lila. I was so afraid of losing you. I thought lying would keep you safe, but it only made everything worse." Clara watched, her chest aching. She saw the same pain in Edward's face that she once carried in her own, the unbearable weight of losing someone you loved more than life itself. The house around them seemed to breathe again. The cold lifted, the air grew softer, and for the first time since Clara arrived, the place felt alive. Lila turned toward the broken glass and whispered, "Goodbye, Mommy." The wind brushed gently through the curtains, like a final farewell. Edward pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her tightly. "I promise," he whispered, "no more secrets." Clara stepped back, her heart heavy but peaceful. She had come into this house with grief, but what she found was healing, not just for Lila, but for all of them. Weeks passed, and the Hale mansion was no longer the house of silence it once was. Sunlight now streamed through the tall windows, filling every room with warmth. The old music box now rested peacefully on the shelf beside a framed photo of Lila and her mother. Together at last, even if only in spirit. Edward had changed. His eyes, once dull and lifeless, carried a new softness. He no longer hid behind his wealth or his grief. Each morning, he walked Lila through the gardens, letting her feel the sunlight she could finally see. She was still quiet sometimes, but her laughter, real, bright, and beautiful, had become the sound that healed him. Clara stayed, not as a maid, but as part of their family. She helped Lila read, took her to the park, and told her stories about her own baby girl in heaven. The bond between them was unspoken but deep. Two hearts that had lost, finding peace in each other's strength. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky orange and gold, Leela ran into Clara's arms, smiling. "Miss Clara, Mommy said thank you," she whispered softly. Clara froze, her heart swelling. "She did?" Leela nodded, her eyes bright with tears. "She said you helped me see again." Clara hugged her tightly, tears falling freely down her face. She looked up at the glowing sky, whispering, "Rest now, sweet soul. Your little girl is safe." Edward watched from the veranda, his eyes misty but full of gratitude. "Thank you, Clara," he said quietly. "You saved both of us." And for the first time in years, peace filled the mansion, not from silence, but from love, forgiveness, and light. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below where you're watching from. Your support helps us share more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us that even after darkness, light always returns.